The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, I think our systems are on. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Methodological Innovations in Gerontology, Advances in Psychosocial Research, developed by the Gerontological Society of America and supported by the GSA Innovation Fund. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the GSA website. A notice to all attendees will be distributed once the recording is available. A question and answer session will follow Dr. Lin's and Dr. Ram's sections of the live presentation. We will be accepting questions through the questions feature accessible on the GoToWebinar panel. Also located there are downloadable handouts for today, the speaker bios, and papers from the special issue being discussed on the webinar. While I introduce our speakers for today, please tell us who you are by answering the poll that appears on your screen. Good, there we go. Our first speaker, Deborah Carr, is Professor of Sociology at Boston University in Massachusetts and the Social Sciences Editor-in-Chief of GSA's The Journals of Gerontology Series B, Psychological Sciences and Social Sciences. Our second speaker, Shevaun Neupert, is Associate Professor of Psychology at North Carolina State University in Raleigh and Psychological Sciences Associate Editor of GSA's The Journal of Gerontology Series B. Our third speaker, I-Fen Lin, is Professor of Sociology at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And our fourth speaker, Nilam Ram, is Professor of Human Development and Family Studies and Professor of Psychology at Pennsylvania State University in University Park. Thank you, Deborah, Shevaun, I-Fen, and Nilam for bringing us this important program. Okay, so let's close the poll now and show the results. Oh, yeah, interesting. Okay, all right, well, without further delay, I'll hand the microphone to Deborah. Let me clear this poll out. And there we go. Deborah?
Great. Well, thank you, Judy, for hosting, and thank you to the participants for joining us today. We're very excited about this webinar, as Shevaun and I were very excited about this special issue. And several years ago, Shevaun and I recognized that the tools that we have at our disposal to do really sophisticated quantitative and qualitative analysis in key topics in social gerontology had really flourished. We have dyadic data and network data and over time data and panel data, as well as the tools to analyze that. And so we thought this would be a really wonderful opportunity to do a call for papers through a special issue that use these technologies and data resources in a really creative way to answer questions at the very heart of social gerontology. We know that in social sciences in general, our capacity to delineate causal ordering really had been limited historically because we had only cross-sectional data. So it was very hard really to disentangle things like social class and health. But today we have more and more longitudinal data that allows us to answer questions better, but it also gives us so much data that we sometimes don't know what to do with it. And so the papers we solicited help us to understand what we can do with all those new data. Likewise, our unit of analysis has really expanded in terms of the kind of data being collected. Whereas in the past, studies of families asked one individual to talk about their entire family, today we have dyadic data, so reports from husbands and wives about the marriage. And we can study parent-child relationships because we now have data from multiple children within the family. We have individuals embedded in social networks of neighbors and friends, also at multiple points in time. And so we've gone from having one person at one point in time to multiple reporters at multiple points in time. And so we have tremendous amounts of new data that allows us to answer questions. But we wanted to solicit papers that did this in a very systematic way and that put the substantive question first. And so we received many, many papers. We were delighted that we had so many really fascinating papers. Those of you who have seen the special issue saw those that succeeded through the review process. And today we're really looking forward to hearing from the two authors whose work we thought really spoke very beautifully to some of these core issues of multiple observation points and multiple reporters. So we're delighted that I-Fen and Nilam have decided to speak with us today. So with that, I will toss it over now to Shevaun.
Thanks, Debbie. The 15 studies published in the special issue are innovative with respect to unit of analysis, measurement, data collection practices, statistical modeling, and replication and accessibility. The work of I-Fen Lin and Nilam Ram, our two panelists for today's webinar, represent each of these areas of innovation. The citations within each bullet point refer to papers from the special issue. And now I will turn it over to I-Fen Lin to share a bit about her work on intergenerational transfer.
Thank you, Shevaun. I will briefly introduce the analytic approach that my co-author Shevaun Wu and I use in the article published in the special issue. After introduction, I will take questions from the audience. Our paper used the multiple indicators and multiple causes model, so-called the MIMIC model. The MIMIC model allows researchers to extract reliable information from parents and adult children's report, so researchers can better understand intergenerational transfer, even when researchers do not have reliable information about transfer. Specifically, when studying intergenerational transfer, researchers often find that parents and adult children do not always provide reliable information about what transfers has been exchanged between them. For example, when receiving care from adult children, parents may underreport, so other people won't think that they are overly dependent on their children. In contrast, when providing care to parents, adult children may overreport. This is probably more common among adult children who would like other people to think that they conform to the social norms of helping their parents, but do not have sufficient resources to help parents as often as they would like. Because only parents and adult children know what transfers they actually exchanged, but both of them may provide unreliable reports of the transfer. Researchers need a tool to obtain reliable information from unreliable reports of intergenerational transfer. The MIMIC model is a tool to meet this need. The MIMIC model is a structural equation model combining factor analysis with regression. As shown in this figure, the red part indicates the factor analysis component of the model. There are 4 items measuring transfer, 2 from parents' reports and 2 from adult children's reports. A latent construct, transfer, accounts for the commonality of these 4 items. A1, A2, A3, and A4 are factor loadings indicating variances in measurements that are attributable to the transfer on which both parents and adult children agree. B1, B2, B3, and B4 are variances in measurements that are not attributable to transfer, implying the unique bias parents and adult children include in their reports. Those curved double arrows indicate correlations among measurements that result from the same respondents or similar question wordings. The green part is the regression component of the model. C's indicate how well parents and adult children's characteristics are associated with unique bias in report. D's indicate how well parents and adult children's characteristics explain variance in transfer after controlling reporting bias. Many statistical software packages can be used to estimate the MIMIC model, including Amos, SAS, Stata, Distro, M+, and MLWin. The MIMIC model requires at least 2 measurement items from 2 informants for the model to work, so researchers should not attempt the MIMIC model unless they have adequate data. In addition, more predictors may be needed for the model to converge, when researchers let measurement errors be correlated with each other. This model can easily be expanded to include more than 2 family members and multiple measurement items. When more researchers moving toward collecting data from multiple family members to better understand family in later life, it becomes important to identify what is happening in the family when family members do not provide congruent accounts of the same event. The MIMI model can generate new insights that conventional strategies cannot. For example, this slide shows how parents' age and adult children's assistance of parents-in-law are related to the transfer to parents when parents and adult children's reports contain bias. Factor loadings shown in red range from 0.16 to 0.71, indicating that adult children's reports of giving time is more reliable measure than and parents' reports of time is the least. Regression coefficients shown in green help identify the covariates of reporting bias and transfer. Specifically, older parents tend to underreport time and money received because parents' age is negatively associated with parents' reports of the transfer. Adult children who helped their parents-in-law tend to overreport time and money given because helping parents-in-law is positively related to reports of the transfer. Finally, parents' age, but not adult children's assistance of parents-in-law, is significantly related to transfer received by parents. Because this regression coefficient is positive, it indicates that as parents get older, they are more likely to receive transfer from their children, net of parents and adult children's reporting bias. In conclusion, the MIMI model helps obtain reliable information from parents and adult children's reports and allows researchers to better understand factors associated with transfer and reporting bias. Therefore, the MIMI model is a valuable tool for researchers. I will stop now. Thank you for inviting me to join the webinar.
Thank you, I-Fen. So now we are moving along to our first question and answer session. Just a reminder that you can type and send questions using the questions feature in the dashboard accessible on the right side of your screen. We will not be using the raised hand feature today, so if you have a question, please be sure to use the questions panel. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible, time permitting, during this part of the webinar. Okay, let's see the questions. I-Fen, I have one here. What's your suggestion to design studies to better capture intergenerational relationships, attitudes, to move beyond individuals?
This is a very good question. As we all know, that it's very important to obtain information more than one informant from the family. So as shown in the previous study, also it showed in my study, we can see that parents and adult children both provide the report are not always consistent. So I think it's really important to collect information, go beyond individual. And I think also very important is to ask more than one question. So like my model suggests that the analytic strategy I use suggests that it's important to ask more than one questions, not just the time transfer or money transfer. I think it will be better if we have multiple questions for time transfer and multiple questions for money transfer. And I think the analytic approach I provide here is really good for people who want to collect data as a pretest. So, you may not be able to, before you formalize your question, maybe a good thing is to have multiple questions about intergenerational relationship or attitudes. And then you can do a pretest, a pilot, and using this analytic approach to figure out, well, which item has lower reliability, which item has higher reliability, and which item there's high consensus between parents and adult children. And I think this tool can provide a way to help people design a better study.
Great. I've got another one here. Could you please walk through the coefficients on the second to last slide again, please? Trying to understand this a bit better.
The second slides.
See if I can take it back.
Okay. So these slides, the red part is the factor analysis. So you can see there are 4 factor loadings, 0.16, 0.27, 0.71, and 0.56. And the higher number indicate which item has higher reliability. So in this case, you can see children's reports of giving time has the highest reliability, has 0.071. And parents' reports of time is the least, only have 0.16. And the green part is the regression coefficient. The positive coefficient meaning over-report. The negative coefficient means under-report. So we can see that parents' age is negative associated with their reports of time and money transfer. So you can see that the older people tend to under-report the transfer. And you can see the positive coefficient for parents' reports of giving time and money to their parents-in-law. So adult children who helped their parents-in-law tend to over-report and time and money given. And then the last part is the regression coefficient. So net of this reporting bias, we can see the parent's age is positive associated with upward transfer, meaning that as parents get older, adult children are more likely to provide help to their parents. And you find there's a 0 coefficient for the adult children's help to their parents. It means that there is no association between parents' support and upward transfer. The old association is the bias. Is not so the adult children's help to their parents is associated with bias, but not associated with true transfer. I hope this is clear.
Great. Shall we take a moment to open it up to the panel? Are there any comments you'd like to share with the participants today? Okay. Why don't we move to the next part of our webinar on stochastic differential equations, grid sequence, categorical repeated measures, and emodiversity. So let's take a pause with answering questions now. And please know we'll email responses to questions we did not have time to get to after the webinar, but we'll move to the next portion now. Nilam?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks so much to Debbie and Shevaun for organizing the special issue and inviting the community to contribute to it, and to Judy and GSA for hosting this sort of marketing event for it. So I'm going to talk about 4 papers that we included in the special issue that my colleagues put together on inter-individual dynamics, categorical repeated measures, intra-individual diversity, and intra-dyad sequences. All of these might fall under the heading of intra-individual variability and aging. So we're trying to get at methods that get at intensive longitudinal data in order that we can talk about process and how that changes with age. Just a note, so if you have questions, type them in as we go along. After I get through all 4 papers, then we'll come back to these questions and try to answer them. So if we just go into the first study here on intra-individual dynamics with stochastic differential equations. Judy, if you can send me forward 1 slide.
Oops. Excuse me.
So in this model, what we tried to do is we tried to link together theory and method. So my colleagues have come up with a model for how it is that the dynamics of affect proceed on a minute-to-minute or hour-to-hour basis. And this is called the dynaffect model. This model consists of two pieces. So the piece in blue has parameters in it that try to quantify the amount of regulation back towards equilibrium that a person exhibits. So a high beta parameter, for instance, would indicate that the person is trying to regulate back quite quickly to their equilibrium. In contrast, the red parameter there is talking about the perturbation. So this is the events that we might encounter in everyday life and how it is that they would push us away from our equilibrium. So looking at this chart down at the bottom of the graph, we can see sort of how on the left-hand side, there's perturbation. People have been moved away from their equilibrium in the red and in the blue. And as time proceeds, those two series are moving back towards their equilibriums, happy in blue and sad in red. So sad is trying to go back down towards 0 and happy is trying to go back up towards 100. Now this model then provides us with a way to quantify how it is that people are regulating in real time, how it is that the environment is perturbing us in real time. Placed in the context of intensive longitudinal burst design, we can look at how it is that age might be related to each of these parameters. We saw in this empirical example age differences in the amount of perturbation such that the quantity of perturbation decreased with greater age, in line with socio-emotional selectivity theory and say savvy. But we did not see age differences in the amount of regulation. So older adults are as good at regulating as younger adults are as good at regulating as older adults. But what we did see in the perturbation side was that older adults may be selecting their context so that they have less variance in the amount of context which is influencing them. Okay, in the second paper, I'm going to talk about 6 different metrics that we came up with in order to look at categorical repeated measures. So we have often a lot of diary data around, and in this diary data, my colleagues Rachel Koffer and David Almeida are looking at stress. So we wanted to try to figure out how we could take an intra-individual variability approach to quantifying, to getting more information out of these categorical time series data. Up at the top, you can see that, say, at microtime, we have a time series, so that's the intensive longitudinal data. And traditionally, intra-individual variability has quantified the amount of variability in that time series using measures of a distribution. So the first moment of a distribution is its central tendency, the I-mean. The second moment has to do with the dispersion, often quantified as the intra-individual standard deviation. And the third moment has to do with skew, so we can create a metric called I-skew. In the categorical world, we also have distributions, and these might be shown as the histograms down on the bottom side of the graph. And the proposal in this paper was that we could quantify those distributions using the same measures of central tendency, dispersion, and skew, but applied in the categorical world. So there's 3 numeric metrics and 3 nominal metrics. So the numeric metrics for central tendency are dominance, so that's how dominating is the mode, which is the categorical equivalent of the central tendency, the mean. So in that bottom left one, we can see that the pink bar is the mode for that particular person. Measures of dispersion, we can use diversity and spread. So diversity is a numeric metric, and it's indicating about how spread out that distribution is. The person up on top is only across 2 categories. The person on the bottom is across 5 different categories, and we'll quantify that one using entropy metrics, and the next paper will go into those metrics in more detail. Nominally, we can talk about spread, so that's exactly which categories was it in which you had events or stressors. The top person here had work and home stressors, the bottom person had work, other, home, network, and argument stressors. And the third moment of the distribution, this is really like skew would be in a continuous distribution, we can talk about rarity, which is the presence of the least common for myself events or order, which is the exact ordering of the prevalence of each of the nominal metrics, each of the different categories. So we can then take the same approach that has been used to quantify intra-individual variability with continuous measures and apply that to categorical diary or experience sampling type data. And our contention is that these 6 metrics will be useful in figuring out how it is that people differ with age. So we can imagine that spread may change as people's social roles change, or the order of the prevalence of each of those different types of stressors may change with age. So in the next paper, we're going to dive into one of these particular metrics, and that's the diversity paper, the diversity metric. And here, diversity is a quantification of dispersion across categories. So on the bottom left there, you can see these are different individuals from the Midas study, and this is an affect circumflex. And we can see that some people have low diversity in that they only experience emotions in a particular set of categories, and others have high diversity in that they experienced emotions in many different categories. And you can see that there's quite a broad range of inter-individual differences there. So my colleague Libby Benson has gone through and come up with some recommendations on how it is that one can implement measures of diversity using experience sampling or diary type data. In particular, she's talked about item selection, how many items it is that a person that a researcher needs, talked about the measurement scale on whether that would be a 0 to 100 slider scale, a binary scale, did the category happen or not, or a Likert type scale, sort of 1 to 5 scale. The choice of diversity metrics, so there's a bunch of different mathematical calculations that one can use. Common ones include Shannon's entropy, which comes from the physical sciences, and another one would be the Gini coefficient, which is often used in sociology to quantify sort of diversity in income. So it depends upon which situation that you're in, on which diversity metric it is that might be best appropriate for your data. The number of occasions, so how many repeated occasions do we need in order to get a reliable estimate of diversity? That depends, of course, upon what the distribution across those categories looks like, but we're looking at upwards of 8 occasions for producing reliable measurement of the between-person differences in diversity. And then lastly, looking at inter-individual differences. So once one has quantified emo diversity or other measures of diversity, one can place that into a regression type model to look at inter-individual, what other variables might be related to those inter-individual differences. So this particular metric makes an assumption that time is not ordered. So we can sort of shuffle around time and we'll still come up with the same calculation of emo diversity. So in the next paper, we looked at how it is that one can look at sequences. So now consider up there in the top left that we can look at data from dyads. And here's how a particular dyad has moved around in a space about a happiness space. So the female partner on the x-axis and the male partner on the right axis, and that white time series is indicating how they moved around among these categories. And our interest here was in trying to figure out if we could come up with inter-individual differences or inter-dyad differences in the intra-dyad dynamics in this categorical space. So the first thing, so my colleagues Mimi Brinberg, Giza Mulur, and Tim Brick have put together a paper in which we sort of make 5 steps on how it is that one can implement grid sequence analysis. The first step would be to create the state space grid. So that's having this time series and then overlaying this grid with the letters on top of it. So we can then come up with how it is that a person moves around within those lettered grids. We extract the sequences. So down there at the bottom left, one can see that for 3 different dyads, dyad A, dyad B, and dyad C, now the time series has been categorized by color and letter. And then the third aspect is to look at the distances between sequences. Here we engage methods which have been used in the study of DNA sequences to figure out distances between protein sequences, and here we apply them to psychological data. So we can see there in the bottom left-hand corner that the distance between dyad A and dyad B is 50, whereas the distance between dyad B and dyad C is only 16. This is done by allowing for three things: insertion, deletion, and substitution, and we try to figure out what's the least cost way in which I can transform one sequence into another sequence. Once we come up with the distances between all of those different sequences, then we can apply cluster analysis. So we have a dendrogram here in the middle of the screen, which gives us the distances between those sequences. We can choose to how many different types of clusters it is that we see. And in this case, we chose 4 different clusters, and that would be our classification of types of sequences. So visually, you can look at these 4 different types of sequences shown on the bottom left and see that there are some differences among those types. Some are homogeneously up in the top left-hand corner, while others are moving around the grid in quite a, they take up a lot of space in the grid. So here we've tried to provide a way in which we can use the dyadic data in order to try to extract out different types of dynamics among the different dyads. So if we go to the final slide here, just to recap the 4 different papers which we've gone through here today. The first paper looked at intra-individual dynamics using a stochastic differential equations approach. The second paper proposed 6 different metrics of categorical intra-individual variability. The third paper took one of those metrics as measures of intra-individual diversity, illustrated how it can be used, and make some recommendations on how to construct studies in order to get at intra-individual diversity. And the fourth paper looked at intra-dyad sequences, proposing a new method for extracting dyadic dynamics called the grid sequence analysis. So I just want to thank all of my co-authors, Julie Wood, Zita Orovitz, Rachel Koffer, Libby Benson, Mimi Brinberg, and I feel very lucky that I can work with all these wonderful people who are putting these together. After Judy does a few little housekeeping things, so happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nilam. So just a reminder, we are recording the session, and we will send you an access link by email once the recording is available. And you'll also be able to download a copy of the presentation slides from today. Please save the date for 2 upcoming GSA webinars as detailed on the screen, and you go to geron.org/webinar for more details. And before we move to the second question and answer portion of this program, please also know a webinar survey will automatically launch after the webinar. In an effort for continual improvement, we would like to hear your thoughts. So please provide feedback by clicking the survey link at the end of the webinar. Now moving along to our question and answer session, you can type your questions in the questions feature of the dashboard on the right side of your screen. And we have a couple of questions here. First one is, on allowing random effects for more than 2 levels, categorical variables in multi-level modeling?
Sure. So we can interpret this question in a couple of different ways. If we would say that we have a 3-level model where I've got occasions nested within persons, nested within families or classrooms, I think that one would need to have categorical measures where each unit would have both the 0 value and the 1 value measured. So at the fastest unit, I would want to have occasions which were coded as 0 and occasions that were coded for 1 for every single unit. And then if I move up to the person unit, I would also want to then have persons that have been classified as 0 or 1 on that binary measure.
Okay. Here's another one. How to design an age-friendly time experience sampling questionnaire.
Oh, this is a good one, and I-Fen might also have some ideas on others, Debbie and Shevaun as well. Our approach has been, in our practical work, we've gotten feedback from participants on making sure that the response category options were appropriate for all of the different age groups. So just to give a simple example is if we had a question which was about how many times did you brush your teeth today, that this is a difficult question to answer if you wear dentures rather than teeth. So making sure that we provided an option or phrased the question in a way that was about also, that included how many times you could clean your dentures on a given day. I think that takes a little bit of piloting to make sure that all of the age range that you're looking at, the question is viable for them. So some types of behaviors, say health behaviors, are not engaged in by younger adults, but would be engaged in by older adults, and making sure that there's facility for them to answer that question. There are options available for people to answer that question. Know if I-Fen or Debbie or Shevaun want to also have some input on that.
I can say a little bit about measurement. Like, I think it's really important to have very similar question wording, just like Nilam mentioned that you want the question to be general, like denture versus teeth. The similar for intergenerational transfer or intergenerational relationship attitude. You want to ask using the question wording that is applicable across different age, different scenario.
Okay, great. I have one here. Are there statistical programming scripts for the 6 metrics?
So on our website, which is quantdev.ssri.psu.edu, there's a whole set of tutorials that go with all of the papers which we contributed to the special issue, and also other stuff. We have a book on growth modeling, and there are also tutorials and stuff there. So indeed, there should be a script there which provides on how to calculate each of those metrics. Well, now, we haven't necessarily invented anything that hasn't been used in other fields. So oftentimes we're borrowing these metrics from ecology, and we're working in R, and in R there are a lot of packages that come out of the ecological and biological side, and they have canned functions to calculate many of these. The tricky ones are in the calculation of the spread and the order in the nominal space. And luckily, object-oriented programming allows us to create lists, and these are basically either open lists or ordered lists, and those are then used within the framework. Just to highlight one issue there is that imagine how many different possibilities there are for the sequences, the spreads, is that there are, in this case, there were 6 different categories, so that's 6 factorial times 5 factorial times 3 factorial times 2 factorial times 1 factorial, which off the top of my head, I think this is 824 different possibilities. And then a trick becomes, how is it that one takes those many different categories and uses those to study between person differences?
Okay. How to deal with missing data for grid sequence analysis?
Okay, yes, this is an interesting one. So missing data within the grid sequence analysis. If I've set up my grid, I can say in the picture which we had on the screen before, there was a 4x4, I think it was a 4x4 or a 5x5 grid, which didn't have a particular value for missing data. We could include an extra value for the missing data code, and that would mean there's just an extra category in which a person is responding in. And the way that that then is dealt with when coming up with the, so we can accommodate missing data there. The way that's dealt with in the cost matrix when we're computing the distances between sequences is that movement in and out of missing data is a little bit cheaper than movement in and out of things which we actually know. So it's possible that we could, we just have to make sure that missing data doesn't become a complete pass-through state. So that would mean that I can do substitution of missing data. So if I want to go from A to C, I could go from A to missing data and missing data to C. I have to make sure that that is as expensive as going from A to C directly. What we find normally in the analyses is that if missing data is really prevalent, then we may often end up with a separate type of dyad or person who is a missing data type. And so we just need to be careful on that side, how to interpret that.
Okay. A couple more. Do you see ways in which diversity spread could be applied to data that are typically hard to quantify meaningfully, like daily activity data?
Yes, indeed. So these metrics are meant to be applied to any type of repeated measures question that is categorical in its response space. So there's another paper by Sumi Lee and Rachel Coffer and colleagues that's in press at Journals of Gerontology, where this metric has been applied to activities directly. People were given a list of different activities that they could report being engaged in on any given day, and that was used in the same way as the other diversity metrics were used. Interestingly, I think that the spread there will allow us to look at how it is that particular types, combinations of activities are more or less prevalent at different ages. So it will allow us to sort of dive a little bit deeper into how it is that the activity space is changing with age.
Okay. All right. And do you see extensions to other areas of functioning for emodiversity, or are these applications specific to emotions?
Yeah, so by the way, this is actually a blast sitting here and answering questions that are coming out of space. It's kind of cool. Emotion diversity was actually our second application of this. So it was we also looked at it in the stressor world, so that we could see how it is that the diversity of stressor experiences differed across persons and with age. And the emotion space, we drew off theories of discrete emotions, and I think that's simply what the requirement is that whatever construct it is that one is looking at, one really conceives that construct as being having different types or categories embedded within it. So it's not on a continuous scale, but it is across these separate categories. And I think it could be applied anywhere. We've ourselves have done stress, emotion, activity. We've done it with the different types of people that you interact with over the course of the day, so say over the course of the day, you interact with family, friends, coworkers, and so forth. So those were different categories of persons. And if one has a domain in which one has these different types of categories, I think that all of these 6 metrics and diversity being one of those 6 can be applied in that zone. That's the space we were actually trying to go after.
Okay, great. Back to the grid sequence analysis, the question is, which software did you use to create the visuals? Are those visuals necessary to understand the underlying process?
So I myself find that visuals are extremely important for understanding the data, and I always encourage everyone to figure out a way to plot their data before doing analyses. Often it saves quite a bit of time if one has an idea of what the data look like before jumping straight into the analyses. There is a set of software which was designed to do, so in the child developmental literature, there's quite a number of papers that are using state space grids. And there is software that goes along with the state space grid approach. And we were borrowing from the look of that software. We recreated those plots in R. So the particular plots which you see in the paper and that were on the screen have been created in R as a way to visualize the data to understand how it is that people are moving around in that bivariate space. Particularly, they're made using a ggplot, and then the sequence analysis part, the sequences at the end, at the sort of the groups of sequences that we saw, those are coming out of a package called Traminer, which is has embedded in it to do the distance functions and create some nice plots. There is a tutorial on the QuantDev website that will walk through how to do each of those particular steps.
And it looks like more about missing data. If you could speak about missing data with each of the techniques and best tips, what to do in those situations.
So maybe if I-Fen wants to take that first, that'd be great.
The missing data for the MIMI model, I just used the multiple imputations. So I didn't do anything really fancier. So I just do the multiple imputation to impute the missing data for those predictors. I didn't impute the dependent variable.
And on the other papers, oh, actually, first I just am surprised that people have missing data. In our experience with longitudinal studies, everybody is providing the data all of the time. So that would be my first recommendation, is to, that was a joke, by the way, for those listening. The missing data question comes up in a variety of different places for the stochastic differential equation models. The assumption is that the noise, which would be considered to be pieces of the environment, has a particular distribution to it. So our sense would be that the missing data would be part of that noise solution. There isn't anything extra that's done in there sort of besides the typical missing at random assumptions that are embedded in many of the analytical models. A key issue in that model, though, is if one got the time sampling correct. So we're looking there at emotion regulation processes, and if we measured too sparsely, then we would not be able to see the regulatory part of that model. If we measured too finely, then the regulation might dominate the perturbations which are coming in from the environment. So getting the time scale correct, which implies that there is some missing data between the measurements which one intended to take, does become an issue. In the categorical repeated measures, the missing data assumption can be accommodated either by having missing data itself as another category. So say if I have 20 different emotions that I'm using to calculate emotion diversity, then I could include a 21st category, which is the missing data piece, and use that as a key type of that exists within already. And with the other categorical repeated measures metrics, I think that would be my same approach, would be to keep the missing data as a separate category, or to engage with imputation in the same ways that I-Fen was talking about. In the grid sequence side, we already talked about how missing data would go in there. Great.
Excellent. I'll open it up to the panel. Are there any final comments or questions or clarifying points you'd like to share with the attendees today?
Maybe I'll ask a question for Debbie and Shevaun. Is where do you see this methodology moving forward over the course of the next couple of years?
I guess that's a good question. And I should say, you know, after this issue came out, I got an email from a woman asking why we didn't have more qualitative work, and partly because we didn't receive that much, but I suspect there are innovations in qualitative research as well that might be happening. So that's something that I think we'll see more of. And I think more generally, just the use of big data and network data that can be used to answer questions of aging, I see as something that is probably going to increase down the road. It will require different analytic tools and different kinds of questions. But I think, again, the network data, enhanced neighborhood level data, repeated measures of both of those, and the big data, whether purchasing or medication, are things that we'll see a lot more proliferation of, and we'll need to, you know, refine our methods to be able to accommodate that kind of rich data. Shevaun?
I would agree with that, and I would say from the quantitative side, it's possible that things like this webinar, the special issue, the QuantDev website that Nilam was mentioning, the ways in which people can learn who are already out of formal training, like academics who are currently sitting in their offices teaching rather than doing on-purpose learning, will be able to either learn through tutorials or find other people who can show them how to implement these kinds of things, like learning R, learning ggplot, learning the tools that are needed to address these kinds of data that I feel like are really interesting and are going to become even more widespread.
Excellent. All right. Well, Debbie, Shevaun, I-Fen, and Nilam, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you to everyone for participating. This is the end of our program. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.